we saw the giants, the sons of Anak.
For context, this took place in 2007, and I was young, but even after all these years, I cannot figure out what the heck I saw. I truly have only told very few people because I fear them labeling me a nut. I am in upstate New York somewhere, and we were driving at night in a super rural town. There was a little town we drove around in often, so we knew our way around, and we knew shortcuts. On this night, we wanted to go to a party, and we chose to take a shortcut. Note, we were not inebriated at all. Ultimately, that was the goal of the night. This kind of messed those plans up. There was a small side street, and at there, you could turn left into a one-lane tunnel and cut to the main road. At the end of the street is a lettuce field which runs parallel to a visible train track behind it. There is a pole with a circular mirror pointing at the tracks, I assume for maintenance workers. This mirror is 10 feet off the ground. As we pull up to turn into the tunnel, we stopped a moment as we were just talking, and we looked forward towards the field. I don't know what happened honestly, but there was this tense silence and fear that came over us. And we saw this slouched creature almost squatting and just stared. At that point, it was crouched down, and easily we could have thought it was maybe a deer or bear. But it turned its head, looked at the car, and its eyes widened in surprise. They reflected green, like cat eyes, but huge. It stood up, and that's when we realized it had 2 legs, and we could see its shape. Someone whispered, "Turn high beams on." And when we did, I was so afraid I couldn't even scream. It was very tall, easily 8 or 9 feet, but its spine was still visible as it was skinny, and it walked hunched over. You could even see its hip bones in its shadow. Thing is, it seemed terrified as we were. It took off straight and ran into the woods, so we went flying through the tunnel so we could get parallel and maybe catch another glimpse. But it was gone. Like we had scared it off. The whole drive ended. We went home. I tried to make jokes about it being anorexic Sasquatch, or just hella drunk Shaquille O'Neal in a costume, but it didn't change the feeling we felt. Just absolutely shaken. It was like that moment of fear zapped energy from us. No, I did not check the time. I regret not checking the clock before and after. Has anybody ever heard of something like this? Now, this account is not my own, but was told to me by a Marine doing combat tours in Afghanistan. For the sake of his own job and security clearance, he has asked that I not give any names and never mention what region they were operating in. From my understanding, the individuals who were with him during the encounter were from a task force operating under orders for the CIA. Beyond that, I was told next to nothing. I will refer to him as Sarge, if only to have a name. Anyway, here's his story. During a patrol checking on some local farmers, Sarge's unit was made aware of a deadly being living in a cave system near their farms. When pushed for more information, the locals were only willing to say that this being was stealing from their farms and had killed a few people who had made the mistake of trying to protect their livelihood from it. Convinced the locals were being harassed by a group of Taliban fighters, half of Sarge's unit was sent out to investigate and either arrest or kill any hostile forces in the area. So, with a few Humvees armed with M2 machine guns, they went out to the cave where the mysterious being supposedly lived. Upon arrival, they noticed nothing of interest. There were signs that something was living in the cave, and the soldiers found animal bones scattered around the entry. Not wanting to risk his entire unit fighting in a cave that the enemy would know very well, Sarge sent his 2 fastest Marines to investigate. The 2 men just gave the others a cocky grin and a thumbs up before disappearing into the darkness beyond the mouth of the cave. For 10 minutes, there was nothing. Not a single sound inside or outside the cave, other than the idle chatter of the bored Marines. Then sound erupted from the cave, shouting and screaming. In a matter of seconds, the 2 men emerged from the cave at full run and zipped past their teammates. One of them shouting, "Run! Just run!" But like the hard-ass Special Forces operators they were, the other soldiers stood their ground, only to see a massive man emerge from the cave. He stood nearly 10 feet tall, with leathery skin and red hair. In one of its massive hands was a log that it began waving at the soldiers in a very obviously threatening manner. Shocked but not panicked, Sarge commanded his men to shoot, and the 12 Marines opened fire. But the bullets seemed to be doing little more than pissing this giant off. Finally, in desperation, one of them fired a grenade launcher at the being, blowing out a massive chunk of its flesh, exposing a small portion of the ribs and ripping most of the skin and muscle off. The giant retreated into the cave, and the soldiers decided that the best thing to do was to head back to the village and report to the rest of their unit. Clearly, this was more than a few Taliban militants. Even with the gaping wound, the giant was too terrifying for the Marines to willingly walk into its territory. So they headed back and reported to their CEO. Of course, their boss didn't believe them and demanded to see proof. So that night, they drove him out to the cave and showed him some of the shredded flesh that had been blown off by the grenade launcher. From here, the report went up the chain, and nobody knows what was done about this creature. I wish he would have told me more, and maybe you guys can help me find an answer. From what I've managed to find on my own, accounts like this are not uncommon in that part of the Middle East. Of course, since all of these reports were word-of-mouth stories, I don't know how factual they are, or if they're being exaggerated. If anyone out there knows what this thing could have been, let me know. About 2 years ago, I lived in an old house outside of city limits in western Alabama. Wild hogs are considered a nuisance in this part of the country, and thus a year-round game. The land wasn't mine, but it was legal hunting ground, so my landlord gave me and my friends explicit permission to take care of any hogs we came across. So a lot of the time, especially during the winter when this encounter took place, I was posted up on my back porch with a cigar and a gun, either by myself or with company. This land wasn't very clear. In fact, we only had about 20 feet from the porch to the tree line. Then it would go down a hill and the brush would get thicker. So our hunting was just being quiet and looking for the beady eyes of hogs in the foliage when we heard rustling. So, all that being said, one night during my porch sitting, I heard some rustling. I started scanning the woods for this hog, and eventually did come across a set of white, beady eyes. They weren't a hog's though, because these were eye level with me. As my eyes continued to adjust, the rest of the creature started coming into view. It was tall, thin, and had long, spindly arms and legs. Its entire body was completely black. I couldn't make out any other facial features besides the eyes, but what I could make out was that this thing was actually a good ways down the hill. So the fact that it was still eye level with me meant that it was likely around 10 feet tall. It started up the hill, moving towards me. I had this feeling in my gut that my .45 caliber bullets probably weren't going to do much here. So I slowly collected my things and headed back into the house. It didn't make any sound as it moved, other than the slight crunch of leaves. As it climbed the hill, it somewhat stopped at the tree line. It then turned and walked along the edge of it. It bobbed and lurched a bit as it walked, kind of how some large birds bob their heads as they move. That was the most terrified I had been in a long while. But this wasn't the only encounter. My hunting buddies and I all saw it several times, walking through the trees a good bit away from the house, sometimes turning to look at us. My roommate, that moved in later that same year, once walked outside and saw it right up against the porch, looking right down at her. It never tried to attack anyone, or even acted aggressively, so we eventually stopped being as scared, though still very cautious, and started calling him Big Boy. I've told a couple other friends about this. One of them said the description and behavior matched something called a California Dark Watcher. I did my research, and as much as this creature matches up, this was on the opposite end of the continent. I'm still not 100% sure what it was that I saw, but I'm 100% sure I saw it. Multiple people did. Update. Just spoke to my old roommate that saw it close up. She said that it was more eerie than downright scary. It looked at her like it was curious, tilting its head to the side like a dog when you're holding something at once. My hunting buddies and I all saw it from 30 to 50 feet away, but she ended up being closer than all of us. She confirmed no features other than eyes, but it had sunken in spaces on the face where there would be features. I understand her not taking a picture. I wouldn't take a picture of a bear if it was 10 feet from me, let alone this thing. I stumbled on this sub about 8 hours ago, and have went as far as I can with all the posts and comments, and that inspired me to tell a story of what I experienced about 4 to 5 years ago. I've told this story in a Facebook group about supernatural beings in Alaska, and I was mostly laughed at and criticized. So, if you're one of those types of people, please kindly just skip this story. So from the posts I've seen, you guys should be familiar with little people, right? I live in Alaska, so we have both little people and big people. We have our own native words for both of them, and there's countless stories about encounters with them. Big people are basically the same as small, but just taller. A long time ago, before photos were relevant in Alaska, my ancestors lived in harmony with the little people. Yes, they're next door neighbors and shit. They lived like that for a while, until one day, one of the dogs of the native people ate one of the little people's babies, as it had stumbled too close to the dog. Food was scarce to try and keep every single dog pack well fed. The little people leader met with the native leader and suggested that they put down the dog and all would be forgiven. Mind you, this was the native's finest dog and was the leader for many years, and he decided against it. Yes, I know it's kind of petty, and I will never understand why he couldn't sacrifice one dog, as great as he was, and try and craft another leader to keep peace between the peoples. As you'd imagine, both sides split up, and it's been that way ever since. It does fascinate me how life would be so much different if the native leader complied with the deal. I do wonder how it would be to live with them from time to time. Anyway, one winter night in cold-ass Alaska at around 5 a.m., I went outside to smoke a cigarette. It was unnervingly quiet and dark, as it usually is at that time of night. I live in a really, really, really small town that barely stretches across a mile long. Outside of my house, there's one LED light connected to an electric pole that's about a block or two away. There's never anyone out riding their machines or four-wheelers at that time of night, and rarely ever is someone walking around. let alone running. I'm smoking my cigarette, and about halfway through, I saw it at the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was someone taking a jog, but who would be jogging at 5 a.m. on a cold winter night? Not insulting my town, but no one runs here, not outside at least. There are some teachers who do run, but all the teachers were out of town, back with their families in the home state, as it was Christmas season. It was also snowing lightly. I turned to look, and oh hell, this 7-foot humanoid was just blasting down the street. I'm talking Usain Bolt shit, going for that gold. I'm not really great at height perception, but I know he was minimum 6'8" to 7 foot. But here's where it gets creepy. When you run, you move your arms, right? It's just instinct, and I believe it does help you go faster with the right form. When I saw it, both arms were tucked in at the sides of his hips. No arms moving, but those legs were going at least 20 to 25 miles per hour. Approximately 32 to 40 kilometers per hour. I was surprised at this point, but then I noticed something else it was doing. It watched me as it ran by. I can see the rough outlines at the top of its body, facing towards me the whole time it was in sight. No arms moving, only legs, looking at me as it burned through the road. Now, did I say there was a bright LED light a couple of blocks away from my house? And it faces towards my place, but that didn't do any help in trying to scope out its facial features, especially since the light was on the side as it was running, and completely on the other side of its face as it was looking towards me. I watched it go by as it watched me also. It felt like an eternity, but really, it was only about a 10 to 15 second encounter. Right behind it, a fox was chasing it, almost like it was its pet or something. Although it's widely known in the state, big and little people have supernatural powers, one of which is being able to transform into an animal it chooses. So I really don't know if that was its buddy or its pet. I'll never know. As soon as both of them were out of my sight, I went further onto the porch to see where they went. My friend, when I told him about that part, said, "Hey, what if it just turned around and ran towards you when you did that?" That made me realize how dumb I actually was trying to observe its whereabouts, and that I never in a million years would go further onto the porch just to see it again. After I saw it had gone, I couldn't fathom what I just saw until later. But I noped back inside. Even my cigarette was unfinished. I didn't even put it in the cigarette container, just flew it across the yard. I went inside, continued on like it never even happened, went to sleep and wouldn't talk about it for another year or so. I have no idea why. But when I did finally tell my said friend mentioned above, he immediately said the native word we have for tall people. A lot of my people choose to doubt me whenever I tell them about it, and it infuriates me because our culture has been involved with these kinds of beings for hundreds of years. We have a lot of folklore stories, but also we have a bunch of accounts based on true encounters. If you read up on supernatural beings in native Alaska, there are some horrific ones that will straight up scare the shit out of you. This happened a long time ago, and I do think of it time and time again. Like, why? Why did it do that to me of all people? I always heard stories of my friends running into little people, and I never did see them before. I would just be like, man, I wish I could run into a little person or something. Or something. I recall saying that a bunch of times. It's possible that one of their supernatural powers could sense this, like almost mocking me. This is what you wanted to see, huh? I wouldn't go out to places at night unless I had a ride because who knows what it would do if I saw it again. This went on for about a year. Then I kind of just forgot about it, I guess. Nowadays, I can walk alone at night and be much less worrisome. I've done it countless times since then, and if it wanted to do something to me, it damn sure could have by now. People tell me that they choose who can see them and who can't. Their stealth is unmatched, and only a select few can see the big and little people. That's why I wonder, why me? Why did it choose to do that to me? Was it just to quench my thirst for the supernatural, telling me this is for real? I'll never know. I'm certainly not going to ask it. My grandpa was born in the last years of the 19th century and spent his entire life living in rural Idaho as a farmer and rancher. He had tons of old cowboy stories he would tell us grandkids. Most of them were funny, some were cautionary, but a few were downright creepy. When my grandpa was 6 years old, he, along with his older brother and a gang of kids from nearby farms, decided to go ice skating for the day. At that time, my great-grandpa was working as a ranch hand, and the family lived near Chesterfield, Idaho, now mostly a ghost town. It was a bright and sunny January day in 1902, and though the temperature was low, the sun kept things somewhat warm. They had hitched their sleighs to their horses and headed down to the Portneuf River to ice skate. There were 8 kids altogether, and they were excited to show off their new skates from Christmas. Along with my grandpa and his brother, there were the 3 Robertson kids, Tommy Bayer, and the Gooch twins. The best spot to skate was next door to the Gooch's ranch. The river there was broad and shallow, so the ice tended to be thicker, and if they did fall through, they would just get their legs wet. The kids spent a couple of hours skating when a loud scream came from a willow bush on the riverbank opposite them. The kids could only watch as a giant man, covered head to toe in thick black fur, came lumbering out of the bushes. It was carrying a large tree branch and was screaming in rage at the kids. They fled towards the sleighs, trying to scramble up the riverbank in their skates. My grandpa, being the youngest, was at the back of the rush. He couldn't get a good foothold because of the skates and fell back towards the ice. The giant was now crossing the river toward them, screaming and swinging his branch. My grandpa was sure this creature was going to eat him. As my grandpa tells it, Lady Luck smiled down on me that day by the river, because as the giant was midway across the river, the ice gave way. It only submerged its shins, but was slowed down considerably as it tried to get back on top of the ice. This gave my grandpa's brother enough time to jump down and cut the laces of my grandpa's skates. They left the skates and dashed up the riverbank and jumped onto the sleigh. As they looked back, the giant man was cresting the riverbank. To their relief, it didn't chase the sleighs. It just stood there, hollering at the kids and swinging his tree branch. The kids were able to make it back to the Gooch Ranch, where they told their encounter to John Gooch, the twins' grandfather. Word spread quickly in the tiny farming community, and soon a posse was formed to hunt down the beast. Where the kids had been skating, there was found footprints almost 2 feet in length. My grandpa's skates were found near the tracks. They had both been bent in half like horseshoes. The tracks headed west into the nearby mountains. The posse followed them as far as they could, but deep snow prevented their travel any further. The creature was never sighted in the area again. The story captivated the small community, and soon word traveled across the country of the Idaho wild man. That spring, my great-grandpa decided to buy a ranch in a little lost river valley farther north in Idaho. My grandpa had many other weird and creepy backwoods stories, but he always said that this encounter frightened him the most. He wasn't sure he would have been killed if the giant hadn't broken through the ice and given his brother a chance to cut his laces. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. If you have a story to share, please send it to my email in the description below. This channel is mostly made up of stories sent in by viewers or people they know, or people I know. Another way to support the channel is to sign up for my Patreon, where you can watch my videos ad-free. More perks will be added once I get back from Australia in November. Also, I will be redoing my merch store when I get back, so keep an eye out for that one. Thank you all for your continuous support. And remember,
Papa loves you.